Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the class of 2025 graduate reading of the Shaindy Rudoff Graduate Program in Creative Writing. This is the second night of our two-part reading, and we're so glad to see you all here tonight. I'm Marcella Schulach, the director of the program, on behalf of my program colleagues, Evan Fallenberg, Alana Bloomberg, and William Kolbrenner. And we thank our founding members, Michael Kramer, Alan Hoffman, who's here tonight, Linda Zisquit. Your presence tonight and at all other events is so meaningful to us, and we thank you for your continued attendance. We'd like to thank the Rudoff family, Hedda in particular. You've given us so much support and joy. We can't exist without our visiting faculty, Jane Medved, Taylor Johnson-Levy, Yoni Hammer-Kasoy, Ayelet Sabari, Dalia Rosenfeld. And tonight enables us especially to acknowledge the entire English department faculty whose courses were instrumental to our students' development. Several of our mentors don't teach in the workshop, but their literature seminars teach our students the critical and empathetic reading and writing skills that are foundational to the production of literature, and you'll meet some of them tonight. Graduates, we want you to know that we are very proud of you. And here's how it's going to work. Each thesis advisor will say their own name and introduce the featured reader, and each reader will then read, so we won't be introducing each faculty member. This evening will last about 50 minutes, and we'll read in alphabetical order of the graduate. And now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Esther Schupak.
Hello. So I am going to introduce my mentee, Netally Goldfine. What has always struck me most about Netally is the clarity of vision. I first discussed her project with her 2 years before she began working on it, and she already knew exactly what she wanted to do. I was also impressed by the scope of her research, which was incredibly thorough, as well as by her willingness to experiment with different modes of expression. What I was surprised to discover at her panel was her skill in reading aloud. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to read from my novel Audacity. This is a story about a slave girl, Sienna. The story is told from her perspective. She is a slave who's bought to serve and to clean on a ship, which is called the Audacious. She is terrible at what she's supposed to do, but quite by accident, the commander of the ship, Commander Dawn, discovers that she can read very well. In fact, she is highly educated, and so he makes her his assistant and takes her to a meeting with Belvin, who is a most accomplished cartographer, map maker, and that's where the scene starts. Belvin, we will sail north if you agree to help us or not. Commander Dawn comes around the table to face Belvin. His stare is intense, and his voice is commanding. If you don't, you are risking the lives of 35 people, my entire crew. Belvin looks at me for some reason, and only then Dawn's words struck me. My head swivels back to face the commander. Did I hear him right? I'm sure I cannot keep the surprise and alarm off my face. Then I look back at Belvin for an answer. Is this true? I realize why we are here, why Dawn needs to meet with Belvin. The actual purpose of the entire journey of the Audacious. Traveling north to the unknown should be a chilling thought, and it is. It is terrifying, and I can immediately feel the fear eat a hole into my stomach. Yet there isn't something else stirring inside me. I'm confused as this other thing is not exactly panic or alarm. It is fear, yes, but mixed with excitement. This is a journey no one else would attempt lightly. It's bound to be an adventure. And the potential for knowledge and scientific findings is exceptional. The vast majority of the population would rather drink a boiling keg of tar than attempt a trip to the north. And what's more, The vast majority of the population wouldn't even get a chance to go there, ever. Here is this old man, a naval cartographer. If I understand correctly, Dawn wants his maps and guidance to navigate the unknown. So if Belvin has maps of the North, surely he has been there. He obviously survived. I've never met anyone who had dared a trip to the North. To see a real-life survivor stand in front of me is more than encouraging. It's like a promise we can return to. Belvin's look is nothing but pity. Whether he pities me for my fearful first reaction and knows it to be justified, or if his pity comes from my subsequent anticipation and is therefore a clear sign of my stupid naivete, I am not sure. He slumps back heavily in the chair next to me. I hope you understand the dangers of getting there. And I mean just arriving at the northern shore. He sighs deeply. The waters are treacherous, riddled with invisible sandbanks, and there are mighty storms. Even with my preparing you, should you get there in one piece, never mind surviving out there. Why do you need to go there anyway? Belvin asks. We are going on an expedition to explore and scout the unknown lands of the North. As of today, there's no reliable research listing and analyzing the indigenous people there. We will examine their development in comparison to our civilization. Dawn sounds as if reciting from a script. He must have given this explanation many times before, or perhaps he prepared and practiced an answer that would sound believable enough so that no further questions would be asked. In Belvin's tired face, his distrust shows through. Have you even seen a map of the North? Do you have any idea of the area you're about to explore? Belvin asks. I have read accounts of sorts and spoken to returnees. Dawn's face is a mask of imperious confidence. Look, Belvin, I want to employ your services. Name your price. Dawn regrets his words as soon as they slip his tongue. This was not a question of money. Belvin had integrity and pride. So much was clear. Money was not something that could sway a man who had seen a lifetime full of human complexity. You know I retired. I don't have to work for you. Dawn's voice is more tender, more cautious when he speaks next. So I've heard, though it looks like you are pretty active still. His hand casually waves over the cluttered table filled with maps and cartographer's tools. The truth is, I need you. We need your help. Dawn fixes me with a meaningful look as if I'm expected to nod enthusiastically in agreement. As you said, traveling north is a risky endeavor. Without your maps, we don't stand a chance. I know it, and you know it. That's why I'm here. There is an art to persuasion, and Dawn obviously needs much practice. Subtlety is not one of his strengths. As a military man, he lacks patience and has no time for embellishments and sugarcoating. He looks impressive standing there, tall and imperious. He will instill fear in his enemies, no doubt. But I don't see him as an explorer. Why would he have an interest in a scientific research exploration? Of course, this kind of journey needs support by strategists and fighters, since they could easily be attacked or run into the midst of an ongoing war amongst the natives. But Dawn is not here as a protector. He seems to be the leader of this undertaking. This is not a military mission, though. Being an expedition, it is a diplomatic one. It sounds like it needs the exact qualities that Dawn is lacking, namely tactfulness and patience. Belvin looks slightly deflated, too tired for arguments. He smiles at me in a grandfatherly warm way, and I smile back at him. I am full of appreciation for his brave opposition to Dawn, though I should be on the commander's side. Dawn clears his throat then and says, Sienna here is my assistant. She is well educated, and her aptitude will surely be to our advantage when communicating with the native tribes. I was hoping you could teach her what the locals are like, and their customs and their languages. Again, no subtlety. He must have noticed the warm smile Belvin offered me and latched onto it like a life-saving piece of driftwood. Belvin smooths his beard. Slowly he nods and says, "There is a language expert. His name is Willem. He is currently out of town." With a slight bow in my direction, he adds, "Not that I doubt your abilities, dear, but if you're interested in communicating in the native tongues of the locals, he is your man." Dawn smiles brightly. Moving forward, he claps Belvin on the shoulder, as if this settled the matter and they had come to an agreement. "Great. We'll be back tomorrow. And tell this Willem to come here as soon as he is back."
Thank you, Netally, for the beautiful reading of your wonderful novel. I'm Evan Fallenberg. Good evening. And I'm here to introduce Asala, who I had the pleasure of teaching but not mentoring. And that task and privilege fell to Dahlia Rosenfeld, who couldn't be here this evening. So I'm going to read to you what Dahlia writes. I'm pleased to introduce Asala Igbaria, whose engaging and energetic novel, Bridging the Past, accompanies its Palestinian protagonist, Fatme, to college in America, where she embarks on a journey of independence, nostalgia, new love, and a renewed appreciation for the family and traditions she has left behind. Narrated with humor and heart, Bridging the Past explores the limitations of freedom, bridging the delicate balance between personal choice and societal expectations, all under the shelter, both literal and metaphorical, of one stranger's umbrella. I present you with Asala Igbaria.
Thank you very much. Today I'll be reading a passage from my fiction work, Bridging the Past. My cell phone starts ringing. As I quickly reach it to put it on silent, my eyes fall on the dialed number. My heart sinks to my knees when I realize that it is an international number. I stare at it as texts start coming. "Please, Fatme, I've been trying to reach you for a week now. Please answer my calls." I hurry out of the library when my cell phone starts ringing again. With a trembling hand, I lift the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I remain silent as I hear his voice. "Fatme, I know it's been a while, and I've been thinking of you." And now he decides to call? What has he got to say? Does he think a call fixes everything? I am aware I haven't been there. We both know we can't go back, but I want to know how you've been if you're willing to talk. How I've been? What does he expect? It's like he thinks a few words will erase all the pain he caused us and the times I needed him. I understand if you're angry, if you feel like yelling at me. Anything. I accept it all. I'm not here to give excuses for my absence. To be honest, I had some issues I've been struggling with, and it's been hard. Of course, not as hard as what you had to go through. I've missed so much already, and I'm really sorry I haven't reached out sooner. I am angry, but as much as it hurts, hearing the regret in his voice and admitting he'd made a mistake sounds somewhat genuine. If you'd let me, I'm not asking for you to forgive me. I won't make up the past, but at least I cannot miss more of your present and maybe future. He takes a deep breath and adds, "I am not sure how much of your future I can take." I find it hard to trust him or anything that comes out of his mouth. If one can lie to a child, there's no doubt he wouldn't be doing it now. "What do you mean?" I ask. His words pull me back to that day years ago. It wasn't the last time I saw him, but it felt like he was slipping away. I was building blocks with Samira, stacking them as high as we could, when the front door creaked open, interrupting our giggles. I dropped the block in my hand, the clatter echoing through the empty hallway. My heart raced as I hurried to the door, only to see him already halfway down the stairs, his shoes on, his back turned to me. I cried out, wanting him to take me with him. My shoes! They were inside, neatly stacked in the cupboard where my mom kept them. He told me to bring them, that he'd wait. I wiped my tears and rushed inside, hope fluttering in my chest. But as I ran back down, shoes finally on, I heard the car's engine start. He lied. He couldn't wait. He didn't want to. When he came back later that day, he said he was in a hurry. Did 1 minute really matter that much? I have cancer, he says, dropping the words without warning. The air leaves my lungs, and there wasn't much in them to begin with. That's how uncomfortable I was. I gripped the edge of the bench, trying to steady myself. Do you remember when I used to lie on the sofa, you squeezed yourself next to me? You were about 6. Every time you held your palm up, rotated it, and said, "Look, Dad, my hand is tiny." Then you'd lift your leg and point to your feet and say, "My feet are also tiny." Then you'd look at me and say, "I am tiny. I don't take up much space." My hands are still small. Every time I look at them, I'm dragged back to that memory I've tried so hard to push out of my mind, knowing I'll always need my dad. He chuckles softly while exhaling a shaky breath. Now you're not so tiny anymore. Maybe you don't need me, but I need you. Back then, I worried about not being small enough to fit it beside him for a cuddle. I couldn't understand it then, but it's like I felt that when I was older, he wouldn't be there. I don't know how to respond. The fact that he still remembers those details. There hasn't been a day when I didn't think of you and Samira, but the look I left on your face made me lose my courage every time I tried to reach out. The word cancer lingers in the air, heavy and unspoken, as if something more than a passing mention. But I brace myself for the answer before I even ask the question. How bad is it? There's a pause on his end. Not great, he says, his voice steady, as if he's trying to assure me despite the reality. But the doctors are doing everything they can. I place my hand over my mouth. At this point, it might stay there forever. Are you taking treatments? Does it hurt? Chemo, he replies gently. But it's not too bad, honey. I'm handling it. I can almost hear the smile in his voice, the one I didn't see much of a child. Before the conversation can grow heavier, he shifts gears. I don't want you worrying about this, Fatima. Let's focus on the moment. We have a lot of catching up to do. Knowing he's out there somewhere is one thing, but the thought of not having it at all, that's a scenario no one ever prepared me for. Thank you.
Okay, now Bill will introduce our next reader, Julia. Bill, we're not hearing you.
Sorry, people. Is this better?
That's
I
great.
sorry about that. So that gave me just a little bit more time to think about Julia's piece from the home front, which in the bookstore will be about a wife who deals with a 47-year-old husband who decides that he wants to go on Miluim. And Julia has managed to provide a psychological study, a sociological study, and an anthropological study. What started out really as a kind of biographical memoir of her husband turned into a really um, beautiful meditation on just the whole question of what it means to be an Israeli, what it means to be the spouse of somebody going into the army and war, what it means to be the parent of soldiers while your husband is going into the army. And each part of her thesis kind of focuses on another place. There's an amazing place where she gives us a vision of like visiting day at the army, but I understand she's not going to be reading that today. Today, Julia is going to be reading from the cafe, which I think is the last chapter in the book, Julia. So without further ado, Julia and the home front.
Thank you. The cafe. Are you ready to order? The waiter was of indeterminate age, skinny, polite, achingly fashionable, in clothes styled to suggest he cared nothing for them. Glancing over the menu, I absently wondered why he was serving in a cafe and not in the army. We'll need another minute, I said, leaning back in my chair and adjusting my sunglasses. I blinked at the man sitting opposite me. I recognized every line and contour of his face, but nothing of its expression at that moment. Had it been a mistake for me to suggest coming here? I'd simply assumed he would want to pick up our usual Friday routine. The cafe was one of our favorites, its regular buzz unaffected by the frequent rocket sirens and nearby terror attack that had plagued it in the years since October 7th. Unremarkable player in Israel's stubborn performance of normality. One line back from the beachfront, it was usually the smell of the Mediterranean that carried through the cafe's always open windows. But that September morning, the wind seemed to have shifted, blowing towards us the fumes of nearby cars, a metallic mix of salt and gasoline. It triggered something in him. He suddenly wanted to talk. It was day 3 of a 5-day home leave that had been marked by uncharacteristic silences, unusual time to himself. He'd returned home to the usual fanfare welcome, but seemed to have left part of himself behind this time. He'd swayed slightly as he dropped his kit bag by the stairs, as if stepping back on dry land after months at sea. This time even the dog had been confused by his arrival, recognizing him only at his sudden appearance at the door, rather than by his scent as he approached. After locking his gun away, he'd sat down to eat with us, still in his oil-streaked uniform. Unnerved by the initial awkward silence, we'd recovered by teasingly holding our noses, joking with him about the novelty of plated food and clean cutlery. I wished I'd made something more special. When dinner was over, he had gone to shower while I made a start on his laundry, aware of the short turnaround time, the possibility of him being called back early. By now I knew that 10 days of tank living meant non-stop maintenance of equipment, showering in bottled water, sleeping in a repurposed shipping container. Everything was permeated with the fumes of heavy machinery, grease, and poudre, Army's favorite impossible to remove kind of dust. The laundry itself had taken on new meaning, now mundane in a potentially life-threatening way. Incorrect washing of a tactical uniform can degrade its fireproof quality, read the small print on the label. From the cafe, I could hear the ebb and flow of the nearby tide. It seemed to echo the rhythm of his home leaves, so brief we could barely adjust to his return before he had to leave again. As we sat amid the thrum, I wondered at the fact of his temporary presence, yet how permanently he and I might be changed by this experience. How often could a couple together for 1/4 of a century go through the motions of disconnecting and reconnecting without long-term consequence? Was there a limit to the number of times a marriage could fracture before its weakened bones simply refused to knit back together again? And even if healing was possible, what kind of scar tissue might remain? His time in reserve duty was now approaching 200 days, long enough for each of us to slip into new routines, to become less used to doing things together than apart, to realize that if we had to, we could each manage single-handedly. But he suddenly wanted to talk, and I picked up the coffee that had appeared before me and braced myself. The least I could do was listen. He began with the inescapable stench of their latest position. It was the first thing he'd noticed about the place. It hadn't rained for months, and the river wasn't a river anymore, but a channel of raw sewage, swollen, putrid, unmoving. They told us to prepare for a 48-hour mission south of the river, he said. We knew we'd need to stay in the tanks to sleep, eat, everything. So we loaded up with bottled water, combat rations, and snacks. I already had a stream of questions about the logistics of a 2-day stay in a tank, but didn't want to break his flow. The murmur of voices and clink of silverware on china faded around me as he caught us up in his memory. He described how, leaving at dusk, it took them just minutes to drive the few hundred meters to the semi-protected area on the river's northern bank, where they parked for the night. With a start, I realized this was a mission that he'd alluded to on the phone shortly before they must have set out. I recalled a snatched conversation, him saying he'd be going off radar for a while, no details. A hurried love you, bye. The next day, I'd woken with the dawn, a wave of sickness building as I rushed to check the morning news. A heavy overnight IDF bombardment had preceded ground forces into a section of the corridor he'd assured me had been widened but still sounded stifling to me. Guessing at his rough location, I plugged it into Google Maps. Can't find a way there, it had told me without irony. I didn't tell the kids where he was. His quiet voice now snapped me back to the present as he went on, setting the stage for the kind of production I would never freely choose to see. They had parked in a spot that was surrounded by mounds of sand and recently created rubble. The remains of a children's amusement park lay shattered before them, the twisted metal pieces of one of its rides scattered on the ground like broken bones. As the last of the daylight waned, they settled in for the night, ready to cross the river the next morning. I held my breath as he told me about the uncomfortable hours he'd spent trying to sleep on his tank's turret in between rounds of guard duty, until I heard myself blurting, "You slept out in the open? You didn't stay in the tank at least for protection?" A short pause in which my mind played out scenarios of him being surprised in his sleep, dragged to the ground by men in balaclavas and stolen army vests before he went on. "You've seen the inside of a tank. There's no way for anyone to get comfortable in it. Anyway, we had to go do guard duty outside, checking for movement on the other side of the river." I signaled to the waiter for more drinks, irrationally glancing around to check we weren't being overheard. Was he even allowed to talk about an IDF mission in public? Did other reservists discuss these things with their wives? I was coming to this late and didn't know the protocol. I only knew that my anxiety was building as I listened to him. But the hum of the cafe went on as usual, the taking of orders, the hiss of the coffee machine. "We got up early the next morning, ready to cross the river," he continued, oblivious to our surroundings. The D9s went ahead, leading the convoy. Our tank followed, then the personnel carriers with the infantry. The more military jargon peppered his speech, the more my civilian mind struggled to keep up. I raced to process the logistics of what he was telling me, distracted by the brooding presence of the M16 lying under the table between us, its strap twisted around the legs of his chair. It was always there now, like an uninvited guest who didn't recognize the inconvenience of their arrival or when it was time to leave.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was very moving and powerful. Thanks. Now, I would like to introduce Sabrina Lamuño. Her thesis, "The Agent," is a groundbreaking interrogation of the concept of agency in relation to work conditions and personal relationships in an office. Sabrina documents her job in an Airbnb call center in Guatemala, experimenting with a transhuman eye and blending witnessed events with social commentary in an age of AI in an environment built for machines. Personally, I find Sabrina's work to be meaningful, moving, timely, compassionate, and Sabrina is an imaginative and conscientious, intelligent writer, and I'm so pleased you'll have a chance to hear her work tonight. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, Sabrina.
Thank you. The first piece that I'll read is called Point Nemo. Point Nemo. There is a point in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, farthest from any land in any direction, found about 2,600 kilometers from the nearest land. Pitcairn Islands, Moto Nui, and Mad Islands are in Antarctica. The name Point Nemo, the Latin translation of Nemo, meaning no man, nobody, a fitting name for a spot so lonely. She surfaced during the evening between 5 to 1. Her silhouette was seen through a crack on the door, talking by herself, near the creaking chair, on her desk. A phone, cables, a screen, and a camera captured her constantly. A small black dot in her computer console to make sure she never left her station. It was in her contract. Even the lifeless need a job. You can go there if you want, but don't expect to see much. Punt these digits into your GPS. Once you're there, you've got just as far back to go to land. If you've got to decide, I'd suggest heading to the Easter Islands. Dulce Island is a non-inhabited stretch of rock, and Antarctica is, well, Antarctica. At first glance, it looked as if she was 2 meters away from the door, but she could be 2,600 miles in Jupiter, Florida, sailing through the waves of the phone wires, serving strangers, and unmeasurable miles away from the camera. Nobody could tell if she was silent and still because her legs were stalled from sitting for too long or because her insides were transfixingly busy. You can't actually see it. Point Nemo isn't a bit of land. It's an invisible spot in the vast Southern Ocean. When boats passed Point Nemo, they were closer to astronauts in space than to other humans on land. It was a Christmas night. The house's family was upstairs, 5 meters away, doing the countdown for midnight. She was 2,600 miles away in Chicago. She could hear people above her and the voice of a man beaming through her headset. She waves to the camera in front of her. Someone must be watching. She pauses, places the call on hold for 2 minutes, cracks the door ajar, and screams. In the 90s, a mysterious noise was heard, less than 1,200 miles from Point Nemo. The sound was louder than a blue whale, leading to speculations that it was a sea monster. Turned out it was the sound of a giant iceberg fracturing and cracking. Está aquí pero no está, she heard someone say from outside her room. She's here, but she's not. The second poem I'll read is a brief moment of reflection and the freedom we had between calls, and it's called Wrap-Up Call. During the 2 minutes after a call ends and the next one starts, it is helpful to distract yourself a little because after all, you only have 2 minutes. So did you know that there are several ways the world could end? 1, the big crunch where the universe expands, but humans get smaller and smaller until we become a micro-inferno. 2, the big freeze when the universe grows dead, cold, and empty. 3, the big change where everything grows into a bubble of dark energy and expands at the speed of light, way too fast for anything to keep up until we are consumed by it. 4, the big break where atoms break, everything breaks, and we explode. 5, a bad day at golf for someone with access to nuclear weapons, and yet all of these ways of catastrophe feel true. Or maybe one day you're at work, taking calls back to back, or finishing your call wrap-up note at the end of the day, and you look at your hands on the keyboard, and you notice they look darker than usual, and you realize that the liquid in your veins is no longer blood, but something lethal, something boiling, like molten rock. And this isn't the first time this happens. It's a creepy thing, but it's a regular thing. Only you ignore it most of the time and compartmentalize it in a box like many other things, like that customer who made monkey sounds at you on the phone. But what is different today is that you can't tell the difference between this fact and any other fact. Like that is a stapler, that is a keyboard, that is a cup. There is coffee inside that cup. I live in Guatemala. My shift ends in 30 minutes. The liquid in my veins is molten rock, and I am writing a wrap-up note. And that's when you realize the skin of your cuticles is breaking. The liquid is leaking through your fingernails, and the sweat of your pores and the oil of your scalp, contaminating your desk station while you hear the sound of many fingers, many keyboards rising, 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 and you finally understand you're exploding. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Karen Berkman. I'm delighted to introduce Lynn Klahr tonight. Lynn's thesis is entitled Writing the Craft of Reinvention. And I think there couldn't be a more apt title for a work and a life that is fundamentally concerned with the processes of remaking oneself. Lynn's work is notable for its emphasis on humor as a therapeutic tool capable of providing both writer and reader a means of rebuilding that relies on irony, self-deprecation, and laughter. I am very happy to invite Lynn to read from some of her work.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I'm reading tonight from The Death and Resurrection of Asala Rosenblatt, a story I started in Evan's class. It was a dreary Sunday in 1970, and her father was enjoying listening to his favorite cantor in the world, Asala Rosenblatt, as the backdrop to his morning prayers. Lauren held her hands tightly over her ears, shaking her head from side to side to escape the sound which she called the noise of Asala Rosenblatt. The record player, turned to full volume, filled the small house. There was no escaping the droning on and on and on of the intensely sad music called chazanish. Her father prayed silently with his eyes closed and opened his mouth, lip-syncing to the ay, 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 ay of the cantor. She decided to count the ayes to distract herself from her misery. She reached 30 and decided she had had enough. An adult-sized headache had taken over her 7-year-old head. Lauren sat coloring and she colored a rainbow to distract herself. But as she listened to the recording of Unatana Tokef, a supplication recited on Yom Kippur, her coloring became black, angry lines drawn with an intensity that tore through the paper. Overtaken with sadness and listlessness, she lay down as she colored. Yasala continued to drone on and on. She tried 2 crayons, one in each ear. Yasala's insistent loud voice, like a cat mewling in the alley, prevailed. She groaned in frustration. Her father had once shown her a picture of his cousins from Dąbrowa, Poland, taken at a family gathering before the war. He had looked at them sadly, touching their faces and reciting their names, shaking his head from side to side, muttering, "Gone, all gone, erased from the earth by the Nazis." She didn't want to think about that. It scared her that people would hate her for being Jewish and want to kill her. She didn't understand it. Perhaps the anti-Semites hated cantorial music? She felt a bit ashamed of hating something her father loved and was so attached to. She imagined his music remind him of the shtetl his cousins had lived in. She watched him as he listened, his eyes closed in concentration, his head shaking a bit with each renewed loop of vocal continuity. Despite his enjoyment and her deep love for her father, she felt she had to escape it for her sanity and well-being. He was wrapped in his talit, his tefillin box was attached to his head, and his arms were wrapped in the tefillin straps. He said, finally, he was about to recite the Amidah. Just then the phone rang, giving her a needed break from the high holidays in May. Her father, on his way to answer the phone, removed the needle from the record player and left for the kitchen. She could hear him jabbering away in Yiddish, talking to his favorite uncle, Herschel. She smiled when she realized she would get a long break and danced a little jig in happiness. Her headache had disappeared. Uncle Herschel and Tante Sushers were her father's only living elder relatives. He had lost his father just over a year ago. She had hated feeling her father's scratchy, mourning beard on her face and seeing the gray that had grown. Her father wasn't old, and she didn't want to see gray in his beard. Uncle Herschel had rescued her father, his 2 sisters, and their parents from Berlin in 1939, sending them tickets and visas for America. They were living under Nazi rule and were still in Berlin on Kristallnacht. The family of 5 had lived with Uncle Herschel and Tante Sasha and their 5 children for several weeks until they got on their feet. She had heard her father telling the story over and over and over. Now Uncle Herschel had rescued her from Yasala Rosenblatt, but not for long. She heard her father say, "Sei gesund," go in health, which signaled either the end of the conversation or the fake end, the intention to say goodbye sometime in the near future. She heard him say Tanta, meaning his aunt had gotten on the phone. When Tante Sasha, a large woman, came to visit, she would immediately go upstairs, remove her girdle, come down, and say, "Amachaya, a pleasure, azach besser, much better." She never arrived empty-handed. She would bring her famous homemade gefilte fish, which floated in its sauce in an old Maxwell House coffee jar. Lauren was drawn back to the problem at hand, how to survive the rainy Sunday afternoon. She considered removing the Yasala Rosenblatt record and putting on Nomi Shemer's Yerushalayim, Shel Zahav. Lauren loved anything connected to Israel, and the song was a favorite. Then an evil impulse, her Yetzer Hara, entered her thoughts, and she listened. She spied the 2 record covers, Yasala Rosenblatt and Nomi Shemer. She removed the record from the record player, took out her Nomi Shemer record, and placed Yasala Rosenblatt inside the Nomi Shemer sleeve. She placed it on the floor and stepped on it with all the might in her 7-year-old body. She heard a satisfying crunch. What would she tell her father? He would be so upset with her. She would say it was an accident, that she accidentally stepped on the record and broke it. She would pretend that she thought it was the Jerusalem of Gold album and act very upset. Then, when it was discovered that it was Yasala Rosenblatt, she would say how sorry she was and that she didn't know how Yasala had crawled into the Nomi Shemer jacket. Her father returned from the arch of the dining room, still wrapped in his talit. She readied herself for her performance as her father began saying the Amidah. He stood in devotion, shaking and shuckling. He bowed several times and in conclusion took 3 steps back, shuckled left and right, returned to his original spot, and rose up on his toes 3 times. This reminded Lauren of the part in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy clicked her heels together and said, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home." Her heart was beating fast as she watched him remove his tefillin from his head and the strap from his arms. She thought about the sad pictures of her dad's cousins, and the tears began falling in earnest. She had destroyed her father's cherished record, a purely evil deed, and now she was going to add lying on top of it. She hadn't thought about the question her father would inevitably ask. How did Yatsala Rosenblatt jump off the record player and land into Naomi Shemer's record jacket? She thought about what to say, how to express her remorse, and her headache returned tenfold. Her father folded his talit and placed it carefully in its bag, the blue velvet one with his name, Avram ben Menachem, written in gold. He sipped the bag closed. She stepped forward with the Naomi Shemer album cover and the broken record inside, tears streaming down her face, hiccuping, her breath catching with each sob. She held out the broken record. She couldn't bring herself to recite her lie. He took the 2 pieces of the record and pulled her to him to hug and comfort her. She was relieved to see he wasn't upset or angry with her. She felt comforted by his hugs and stayed in his embrace. She removed the pieces of the record from his hands and stared at it in disbelief. Bafflement and relief filled her little body in equal portions. Yasala was safe. Naomi, however, was broken and wouldn't be able to sing about Jerusalem again. Thank you.
Hey,
So, first of all, thank you. That was great. It's my pleasure now to introduce Ofira. Um, Part of I think the reason these events are so beautiful is because we not only know the books and the works, which of course stand by themselves, but we also know the people and sometimes the struggles and challenges that they met along the way. Ofira's thesis is called "It's Only Brain Surgery," only, and it really details her own kind of journey from the journalistic world she was in to a moment of, well, when her son was born, a kind of crisis. And it turns out that that crisis allows for her to understand both herself and her son in ways that are unexpected. Her son is a special needs son. And Ophira really just explores all of the aspects, some of them terrifying, of parenthood, and also working and writing with a little piece. I think one of Ophira's chapters, it's only brain surgery, but we find out that part of Ophira's brain is missing, and it's not only it becomes a kind of trope or metaphor in the novel. So she's going to read from us from the first chapter called "No Skin."
Thank you for that. So, yeah, I'm reading from the opening chapter, and I'm changing all the names for the sake of privacy, except for my own name. No Skin. You are a skin. It was 2008, Tel Aviv, and a child psychologist just said this to me. Ben must have been 4. He was a beautiful baby. As a toddler, his blonde curls gave him the look of an angel, but his development was slow, extraordinarily so. Because everything is so difficult for him, he experiences the world as unsafe, said Anne in her French accent, her long earrings dangling alongside her cheeks. I seated opposite her in our clinic filled with toys. It's as if he were born without skin. You are his skin. It would take years for me to acknowledge that Ben developed significantly slower than other boys his age. His father and I danced around this truth from the day he was born until we divorced when he was 6. Even after, our puzzle dance continued. During those slow years of gradual understanding, my husband would accuse me of seeing our son too positively. I him of seeing our son through a black lens. I was refusing to face reality, he would say. Our son would be fine, I would reply. He was advancing at his own pace. My husband was right. I was wrong. I failed to consider the psychological consequences of always lagging behind. Abysmal frustration. Who would you rather believe as a mother? The private neurologist who, after observing your child for 30 minutes, declares nothing is wrong, he's a late bloomer? Or your mother-in-law who expresses concern to your mother that your toddler isn't making proper eye contact, stirring fury in you for not telling this to your face? I preferred the expensive expert's opinion over my mother-in-law's. When I said I am Ofira, Ben's mother, at the start of my son's life, I thought I knew who I was. But it would take a dozen years and a second pregnancy to say again, I am Ofira, and know, truly know, whose mother and what kind of mother I was. It would take the rarest of medical incidents to understand more fully the functioning of my eldest son's brain and, by extension, his psyche. Brain surgery at the height of my second pregnancy. I would narrowly escape death, but lose my short-term memory. I wanted to be a heroine after what happened. I wanted people to look up to me, to be an inspiration. And so 6 months or so after the last round of poison pills, I loathed the official term chemotherapy, I ran half a marathon, in almost the exact same time as the last half marathon I'd run before my pregnancy. A mere 2 seconds slower, to be precise. I ran a full marathon the following year, guiding a visually impaired and deaf friend, a band tying his arm to mine. I was on a morning talk show about it and on the sports channel. I did everything within my power to beat the starting statistics of the crushing diagnosis. I began eating organic food, stopped consuming refined sugar, and joined a yoga studio, which became my second home and where I still attend classes almost every day. I couldn't bear the thought of being a number among many. I needed to be different, special, larger than life. Otherwise, all would be too terrible to bear. The many moments of despair so deep while raising Ben, that at times I daydreamed of wading into the sea, swimming to the horizon, and never looking back until I quietly drowned. The incidents of verbal and physical violence, of neighbors calling the police because of the deafening screams they heard, the loneliness of living without family in a foreign country, the doomsday diagnosis, and the dark, confusing, plum-sized hole in my brain that I now carry around every day, everywhere, like an invisible handicap. Why did I want to be a heroine? What was in it that need? I wanted to write an inspirational bestseller. One, I told my sister, that people would read on the beach in one afternoon. Juliette Binoche would play me in the movie adaptation. Heroines have no flaws, or have they? I must find the courage to expose what I tend to hide, the ugly. This will not be an inspirational bestseller you'll finish on the beach in one afternoon. It will be a heavier read. When did I first begin to realize something might not be quite right? A memory of a vacation from hell in my native Netherlands comes to mind. Ben was a toddler, his behavior catastrophic. He refused to listen, screamed, yelled. We had all rented a holiday home by a small sweetwater lake in the northern province of Groningen. Although summers in the Netherlands are as rainy as winters in Israel, the weather was nice. We were lucky. The mild summer sun that first noon felt pleasant on my skin, the sand by the lake and warm and comforting under my calves. As Ben held a toy pickup truck, imagining it driving over uneven miniature dunes. But after we walked back to the holiday home, things soon got out of hand. All proved too much for him. Too many people in one place, too much noise, too many signals, and a language, Dutch, of which he understood not a word. I didn't yet know then, in that summer bungalow, that Ben had special needs. I didn't know yet then that in later years as a teenager, he would threaten to commit suicide and murder me. That he would hit himself with a heavy saucepan on the head many times, so hard that the blows deformed the robust pot. That he would hold a knife against his throat in front of his younger brother, who would howl like a jackal and panic and beg, "No, Ben, no, please don't do it. Please don't do it." I shouldn't have put him in the hole. Time after time after time of the holiday home, of my parents' home later on during the same vacation. only for his behavior to escalate until he spiraled out of all control. I shouldn't have left him on his own, anywhere. A child in fear should never be alone. I should have taken him in my arms, away from the noise, away from the people, to a quiet spot in nature. Sit down under a tree and done nothing but hold him, nothing but hold him, nothing but hold him. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ofira, and really just thank all of the readers who read so beautifully today and brought their work to us, and we're really grateful. And thank you, Marcella and Evan, as always, for putting the program together. And I'm so grateful that I could be a part of this. And a big shout out to the emeritus Professor Michael Kramer, who we don't get to see often enough. Hi, Michael. Thank you, Marcella. Are we good?
We are great. And I also want to shout out to the emeritus, Alan Hoffman as well, who's there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, thanks. We miss you and thank you all so much.
Good night, everybody.
Amazing reading. Thank you.